Good evening and welcome to What's Your Story? I'm your host, James Ransom Reed, Jr. We finished part one of my interview with Laurencia Ciprus, an extraordinary human being with a marvelous gift, the ability to write and paint pictures with words that tell stories and touch people. We did part one, and I'm so happy she remained here to do part two. And I know that once you hear the rest of her story, you'll be happy she stayed too. Welcome back, Laurencia.
I'm still here. Thank you.
I'm still
Jim.
here. Laurencia,
Yes.
you describe yourself as a humorist and a conduit.
Yes. Well, a conduit. I think of myself, 6 degrees of separation, 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, the 6 degrees of me. Anytime I get together with people, I figure out this connectivity. I was just talking with your director, and we know each other somehow. I know a lot of folks, but also it's a matter of putting people together. I have a gift of finding the right people to answer questions for other people.
Yes.
So my writing does that, but also I'm kind of a go-to person. Do you know someone who's X, Y, and Z? Yeah, I do know someone who's X, Y, and Z, and somebody needs this and somebody needs that, and you put them all together. It's kind of like the old movies with Judy Garland. Oh, we have a barn and we have a cow and we have this. We're gonna make a show, and that's what it is. And I'm like the director. I'm like the ringmaster of my own circus half the time. It's true, but it's a conduit in the sense that on a spiritual level, I have a lot of synchronicity. I have stories that are really defiant of coincidence, how I meet people, how my life has changed, showing up at the right time. I don't know if it's instinct or having the ears of a tracking hound or something. But I do hear, it's like I hear a frequency saying, "Go here, do this," and it works out. And how I ended up in the English department at UConn when it was the summer, and my professor that I was hanging out with in the art department said, "Laurencia, you know all about art. You know how to curate. You've done it. You paint. You do all this stuff. Now walk over to the English department and see if Sean Forbes is around." I said, "Why would he be?" He said, "Just take a walk over. Maybe he'll be there." And he was there, and the rest was history. And I wound up really, really following my truth and showing up. And by showing up, I had both of my manuscripts one year after another for my fledgling novel with Andre Dubus III, who wrote House of Sand and Fog. And he validated that I'm on the right track. He says, "Kid, you got a voice. Now finish the damn thing," which was pretty great. And we had lunch and breakfast together. And Joanne Mapson, who writes Western novels the next year, with a short story I had done. And during that time, my next, if we want to talk about my next, would that be a good place to go?
Well, where we're going to go right now is, who was Laurencia Ciprus 20 years ago, and who is she today?
Oh boy, 20 years ago. 20 years ago. 20 years ago would have been about 2000. 2000, I was painting. I was curating. I had started picking up my art again. I had solo shows. I was exhibiting, jurying shows. I did the Hospital for Special Care in New Britain. I was the judge and juror and curator of that show. So I was concentrating on that. My mother was still alive. We were knitting. We had a knitting business together. And I was also working with my ex-husband, utilizing my design skills, doing business-to-business market research with him. We built his company together and worked elbow to elbow, shoulder to shoulder, doing competitive research for all the major manufacturers, which I believe he's still doing somewhere in a galaxy far, far away. Let's hope so. Live well and prosper, my dear.
There you go.
But 20 years ago, it was about 2003, and the thing that did happen 20 years ago was something very funny that you brought up 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I had been sick for 46 years, undiagnosed with chronic autoimmune issues, chronic anemia, a terrible immune system, chronic fatigue 20 years ago. And I'm glad you brought this up. I had undiagnosed celiac disease. And I finally found a doctor by a great coincidence, another one of these synchronistic moments. I was in the Stop and Shop with my ex-husband, and my grocery cart plowed into this very large, very imposing guy. And he was he and his wife were just back from working infrastructure for the United Nations on a global level. And I looked like the color of a manila folder, and I was about 20 pounds thinner than I am now. I looked horrific. And I was exhausted. And he sent me to this doctor. I walked in, and the doctor said to me, I know what's wrong with you. And we've been through this for years. He said, you have celiac sprue. Did your mother say you had that? I said, yes, but you grow out of it. And if the doctor had a fork, he would have pushed it through his head. He was going like this. He goes, you don't grow out of this, dear.
Yes.
And that began a very big transformative period in my life, because I had no energy up until then. I mean, when I was on the road, I'd sleep half the time in the afternoon, pulled over in my car. Fast forward, I wound up starting a support group in Old Saybrook with some other women. And I also landed me in Boston at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center on their advisory board for the Celiac Center. And that's when I feel was a transformative time and pivotal for me. My life changed. I had energy. I was healthy. I was well, and I was able to go 100 miles an hour.
For those listening who might find what you're saying fascinatingly informative,
yes.
What is celiac?
Celiac, this is very important, and feel free to reach out to me, Laurencia Cyprus, on Facebook or Instagram. I'm happy to help. I wish somebody had helped me. Celiac is an autoimmune disease. It's an inability to metabolize gluten. So for all of those folks on a recreational gluten-free diet, I have to. It's survival. Basically what it does, it's an autoimmune response in your gut. The villi, which are the little hairs in your intestine, they kill them, so you're not able to metabolize nutrients, so you're exhausted, you're anemic, it kills your immune system, you're worn out all the time, you're fatigued, you're malnourished essentially. And the good news is, if you do get diagnosed, and the right way to get diagnosed is to have an endoscopy and a colonoscopy and a biopsy, and they will definitively find out whether you have it. If you do, and you adhere to a regimen of gluten-free eating, I was better within a month. It was like a different world.
How long had you suffered with that?
46 years since
46 years.
Since birth. I almost died as a child from pernicious anemia.
Wow.
They didn't know what was wrong with me. And I had strep every year. I had a double pneumothorax. I was hospitalized many times. Asthma. I'm on no medications now. Nothing.
So, Laurencia, like most of us, you've had your share of misfortunes. You had an automobile accident where you suffered a TBI.
No, it wasn't an automobile accident.
It wasn't the.
No, I was given blood pressure medication, which was unnecessary.
Oh. Okay.
I was dehydrated because of it. I was in somebody's home. Actually, a friend of mine who had cancer. She was recovering from cancer, an acquaintance.
Oh. Okay.
And there was no air conditioning in the house, and didn't realize that I was more worried about her than myself. Got up and saw everything went grayscale, and I went backwards and hit my head.
Oh.
That's what happened.
So how did that impact your writing?
It actually informed my writing on a very large level. It became my capstone piece because I took a semester about empathy at the time.
Tell people what capstone is. So.
Capstone is the wrap-up when you go back to school and you have to study one specific area and do a paper on it. And I studied empathy and otherness and the whole idea that we have to be mindful of that. We really do, and how we treat other people and we view other people. But at that time, one of my dearest friends had a glioblastoma. She was dying of it. And Morwen had lost her language, and we stayed friends till the day she died. I was at her bedside in Boston when she passed away. But until I had that TBI and I had aphasia, which means I lost my language, I understood the difference between sympathy and true empathy. Until you walk in somebody else's shoes, you do not have true empathy. And I learned what happens when you lose your language when it's so important. It informed my writing in the sense that we don't know what tomorrow is. Nothing's promised. Do the best you can every day, and don't put off your life you don't know.
Are you still having the effects of the TBI?
None whatsoever.
None whatsoever.
I was very, very fortunate. Very fortunate.
Yes, indeed. I would say you were.
There were no residual effects.
Now, you mentioned to me that you had 2 hips replaced. Too.
I did, and talk about synchronicity. I was, because of celiac, my bone density was impaired. There are a lot of secondary issues that happen,
Yes,
and tertiary
yes.
because of celiac.
Yes.
And my bones weren't great. And during COVID, everything headed, I was limping and I was denying it over quite a few years. I was really in a lot of pain. And everything hit the skids then. And I was very, very lucky. I had no insurance. Things were not going well with my ex and myself. So money was at a premium. It was very tough. We were going through court stuff. People were disappearing. And I went to the clinic at St. Francis Hospital with no other recourse. Then I went to see, and I have to mention him because he's not practicing surgery any longer, my old doctor, Dr. Stephen Schutzer, who was a pioneer. He's a humanitarian. He was a pioneer of the Connecticut Joint Replacement Institute at St. Francis Hospital. Mm-hmm. Went in to get my records, and he looked at me and goes, "Dear, what's the matter with you?" And I said, this is happening. And he said, I was crawling in there.
Yes.
And he took it upon himself to take me on, handed me a big green folder, and he did both of my hips within 6 weeks. And that's that's one of those moments, like you talk about being a conduit, mm-hmm. being at the right place, and I just seem to find like-minded people that are humanists. And he's an amazing person. He was actually the surgeon for the Hartford Ballet.
Now, people out there contemplating getting that hip replaced, what would you say to them?
Don't put it off. Don't be in denial. The sooner you get it done, the better. And I'm not plugging this place, but go to Connecticut Joint Replacement Institute. They're the best. They're St. Francis. No one does it better. No one does it better. They have their act together. They really do.
Okay. You know, Laurencia, you said something when I interviewed you earlier.
Yes.
For this interview.
Mm-hmm.
You said, I am guided by a larger something.
Exactly,
the
larger something.
It.
Yes, and this is a good example. The gentleman I've been dating on and off for many years was a student. I met him very, very randomly at a Starbucks in Old Saybrook.
Okay.
As my mother was dying, actually. And his professor was Harold Feinstein. And Harold Feinstein is one of the most famous photographers in the world. He did the Coney Island photographs. He did Oprah's Roses. He did covers for the Blue Note. He lived at the Jazz Loft with Miles and Monk, and was the youngest photographer to ever have a piece at MoMA. Stieglitz discovered him. Edward Steichen, I believe, discovered him. And in any case, those are those moments where things guided by something larger. We went up to visit Harold. I didn't really understand who he was. I had just finished UConn, and I had this inner drive. I was going to write for Inc. Publications, period. I said, that's who I want to write for. They're the real deal. It's true journalism. Whoever's doing this is a genius. And I started badgering Jeffrey Lilly. God bless him, Jeff. We love you. And I wore him down at the exact same time. He said, all right, we'll write something. We'll figure it out. Jeff's an ex-heavy metal rocker. He's phenomenal. He has energy and verve beyond compare. But in any case, guiding from a larger place, I had to write for Inc. I don't know where this came from. Had to do that. At the same time, my friend brought me up to see Harold. I happened to have my capstone piece about my brain injury.
Yeah, yes.
One thing leads to the other about empathy. And Harold's wife turned out to be a Kennedy Fellow who was the founder of Children of War.
Wow.
Didn't know Harold was dying, and she pokes him, and she said, he's in a wheelchair. Will you please write an article about my husband? Mm-hmm. And I filed the article Friday the 19th of June in 2015, my first article for Inc., and Harold passed away on my birthday 3 days later.
You know, that's a great segue to the next question. I know that you have written many articles, and who are some of the people that you've written about that the audience would love to hear? Who are some of the fascinating people?
Fascinating people.
Well, Miss Kelly, right?
Yes, Miss Kelly, Patricia Kelly. One of my favorite people. We started the article right before COVID.
Well, tell them who Patricia Kelly is.
Patricia Kelly is one of the finest people I know. Patricia Kelly runs Ebony Horsewomen in the north end of Hartford on the margins of Keeney Park. And she has a story in her own right. Look at the archives of this wonderful, what is your story, and look at the interview with Mrs. Kelly. But she worked with the most at-risk kids in the North End of Hartford, and sends them to rodeo and teaches them equestrian. And as a result of knowing Mrs. Kelly and circling back at the right time, I was honored a few weeks ago to be a presenter at the Black Boots Awards, which was a nationally recognized, the first annual, recognizing national, international African-American members of the equestrian community. Who have I interviewed? I've interviewed Paul Winter, the environmentalist. It took me a lot of patience. It took 3 times around to reach him. I spent the day at his farm, learned about his environmentalism, his music. I was in there on the coattails of Paul Simon had just left. It was an amazing experience. We had a great day playing his marimba bridge on his property with mallets in the rain. He was amazing. Of course, Harold. One of my favorite articles was on the Peabody Museum David Friend collection, and David Friend founded Carbonite Cloud Computing. So it's not just the story, it's the people driving the story. And David Friend was an amazing guy. He fell in love with rocks at an early age, and he put together this incredible collection at the Peabody Museum. It was fabulous.
Jeff Fletcher?
Jeff Fletcher, we're not there yet. I'm working on Jeff Fletcher.
Okay.
That's coming up. Jeff Fletcher is the Ruby and Calvin African American Museum that is new. Everybody needs to know about this in Stratford, Connecticut. It's going to be expanding larger and larger,
yes.
Telling the true story of the true story of the African experience and all the atrocities that this country has forged against people of color. And I have a very, coming up where I write a lot about people of color. I write about people who don't have a voice, who need to have that representation. I've written about Andreas Chaparro. He is the artist in residence of the Ridgefield Jazz Festival in Jersey with Christian McBride. He does jazz art and collage. He's at the Windsor Arts Center. He's a dear, dear friend. He and his wife, they're lovely, lovely people. Wrote about them for Art New England. Other people. I have a piece coming out about heart transplantation in pediatrics. I'm branching out of Connecticut a little bit, about a little girl in Kentucky, and I was able to speak to Dr. Jeffrey Tobin, who studied with the pioneers with DeBakey and Cooley down at Arthur Anderson, at MD Anderson Heart Center, and he was wonderful. And we talked about pediatric heart transplantation and how important that is to be aware of. Another piece coming up is on Pierre Sylvain. Pierre is a self-taught Haitian artist here in the Hartford area who's embarking on some new chapters with mosaic glass and 3-dimensional textile art. And there's never enough time, and there's never enough paper. There really isn't.
You know, Laurencia, you've been described as an inspiration to younger people. We talked about that.
We like that.
A fountain of mirth. Determined, creative, imaginative. Laurencia uses words to create unforgettable images. Did they leave anything out?
I don't know. I just do me. I'm not sure. I think everything's a canvas. I mean, I love fashion. My mother was a fashion designer, costume designer. She took off in 1940 from Weaver to study fashion at Pratt, and that's one of my. I don't have any addictions. I've never drank. I never was a drug person. I never smoked cigarettes. I don't overeat or gamble. But man, I love footwear and I love clothing, and I think it's just another form of self-expression.
So, do you have a sizable collection of footwear?
I have a sizable collection of footwear. I do, and I think Mimi Pond, my friend who's the writer, wrote a book called Shoes Never Lie, and Mimi's a very, very wonderful woman. She wrote this little book called Shoes Never Lie, and they don't. And it's not just about the shoes, it's the allegory of the shoes, and women have a thing for shoes, and you know, it's what we do.
It's what we do.
I understand Carrie Bradshaw really well.
You told me the first time I talked to you, and I'm quoting you here.
Yes.
I had to grow into the person that I would become.
Absolutely, and at 5'1", you know, it's a tall order. But yeah, I mean, I vision myself as a terrier because terriers are small, bodies, and they overestimate their capacity, but that's okay. Yes, you do. I wanted to be a writer, but when people say, oh, I want to write, you can't write unless you've lived. You can't write unless you've suffered. You can't write unless you have a story of your own and everything. And I think also, people get really dodgy when they speak to me if I'm writing their story. You also have to have some gravitas. You have to have some character and integrity. You can write about anybody, but you can also ask someone, I'm going to use this for background to understand you better, but I'm putting my pen down right now. I have people's secrets, and people tell me their secrets because I respect them. And that's really important. But that's, as I say, you don't understand that level of integrity without my traumatic brain injury, without understanding empathy, without losing my friend, without losing my grandmother, without losing my mother. You don't grow into the person you're going to become, I don't think, until you draw your last breath, because we're always evolving.
So the transformation is ongoing.
I believe so.
And
on a molecular level and on a spiritual level and a social level, because everything's mutable.
Where is Laurencia going to be in 5 years? What will she be doing?
Hopefully doing the same thing. Hopefully doing more media. Hopefully being on air a little bit more, talking to people on video, on camera. Finishing my book. Writing for larger platforms. I'll never forget Jeff. I'll always write for Inc. Finishing my book. Being in an anthology of short stories. And just doing more of what I do.
What you love. What
I love, and continuing to live on my lake. I live on a lake which has saved me with nature and fox and coyotes and all sorts of animals. It's magical, and talk about being at the right place at the right time. I find everything on Craigslist. It's good stuff.
What did you find at the studio today when you came here and you had to go and find something in your shoe? What was in your shoe?
I really think it was an amulet. I found a piece of cat food. And to be really honest with you, I'm wearing black, guys, and yeah, you know, I have two white. Everybody knows if you follow me on Facebook and Instagram, I have Dash and Bunny, and they're white pets, and I wear black because I'm a New Yorker. You know, this is what we do, and you know, I come equipped with a lot of tape, but the cat had left a piece of food for a good luck charm, I think, in my shoe. It was really nice of her. The bun.
What would you say to people watching you and having heard your story this past hour? What advice would you give to people about growing into who they are and becoming what they are?
Every day, get dressed. Every day, get dressed and walk out of your house. Go sit at a coffee shop. Go meet new people to fall in love with. Go meet new people to be friends with. Go talk to people and put your damn phone down. And I don't have a television. Talk to people. My phone rings all day. Talk to real people. Talk to real people. Make real friends. Don't say, I can't. You can do anything you want to do. Call me. We'll talk.
Put your phone down.
Put your damn phone down.
How do you exist without a TV? Very well.
Very well.
As
long as I can watch the Gilmore Girls.
There you go.
At 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm fine. On my phone.
That's all the time we have for my interview with Laurencia Cypher. Laurencia, thank you for being on the show. We deeply appreciate you being here, telling your fascinating story.
This was great fun.
The name of this show is What's Your Story? And I am your host, James Ransom Reed Jr. Everybody has a story. What's yours? Until next time, good night.
Welcome, I'm Nick Augustino. I'd like to welcome you to the Clam Box, where we do seafood our way. We got lobster roll, fried clams, fish and chip, fried shrimp, and our famous onion rings. We put a lot of precaution into the safety for you and your family. Not only do we use plexiglass at the cash register and sanitizer, we all wear gloves and we all keep a 6-foot distancing, and everybody must wear a mask. We carry all the options. We got DoorDash, Grubhub, Uber Eats. And of course, we got curbside where we bring it right to your car. Online ordering is available at clamboxnewbritain.com or by calling us at 860-357-3118. The Clam Box, 586 West Main Street, New Britain.